Last night I got to witness Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker in a half-empty theater. It wasn't until now that we came to fully realize just how much The Last Jedi has completely and utterly destroyed Star Wars. For 2 years I was saying there was nowhere they could have gone after Episode 8. Kathleen Kennedy and Roundhead Rian Johnson not only subverted our expectations, they subverted the entire franchise. Roundhead destroyed every plot thread set up in The Force Awakens, which has not aged well, and dug this disaster of a trilogy into a hole it could never get out of. Even a competent writer could not fix this. But rather than a competent writer, we got J.J. Abrams. And watching him try and fail to fix this mess is the only real entertainment we get out of The Rise of Skywalker. This film is nothing more than a disjointed mess. J.J. tried to cram as much in as he possibly could, gave us ridiculous explanations and contrivances for the stupidity set up by Roundhead, and introduced numerous plot threads that go absolutely nowhere. This thing is at least 3 movies crammed into one. It's clear that this film was shot, reshot, edited, re-edited, reshot again, and re-edited in a complete state of panic. What does seem clear is that Disney and Lucasfilm are fully aware of the damage that The Last Jedi did to Star Wars, even if they would never admit it. There are moments in the film where JJ pretty much flips off Roundhead, such as a scene where Force Ghost Luke, yes, he only appears briefly as a Force Ghost, tells Rey that he was wrong for throwing away his lightsaber. Rey is still an unbelievably OP character, more on that shortly, but there is actually very little identity politics in this one. So I'll give them credit for that, even though it was obviously done, because had this film become another ideological lecture session, the wrath from fans would have been unlike anything we've ever seen. Perhaps this is a sign that this trend from hell will be starting to come to an end, and there is an important lesson to be learned here. When you destroy something through the use of identity politics, the only place to go with your follow-up product is to start again from scratch, like what Ghostbusters is doing. Try and make something with the same characters and try to fix a broken storyline, you end up with The Rise of Skywalker. So let's get into this disaster piece. We begin with Kylo Ren making his way to Exegol, or whatever it's called, after finding a Wayfinder device, and manages to track down the was dead until this film was thrown together Palpatine, who was held up like a goddamn ragdoll. Here Jar Jar uses every smoke and mirrors trick in the book, from eye-straining strobe lights and lens flare, his own special trademark, to maximizing the reverb and echo on Palpatine's voice to make him seem as imposing as possible. His desperation is on full display in the first minute as he tries to fix Rian Johnson's mess. Here we learn that Palpatine created Snoke as a puppet. Did he though? Did he really? I believe Colin Trevorrow made it clear that Palpatine was not in his original script, written before he suffered the same fate as most other Disney Star Wars directors that didn't bow to Kathleen Kennedy's will. Keep trying to convince us that this was the original plan, Jar Jar. Apparently, a secret armada of Star Destroyers has been under construction for quite some time. That's quite the hiding trick, man. My suspension of disbelief only goes so far, and we eventually learned that not only are they Super Star Destroyers, but they are also Death Star planet-killing Star Destroyers. Really, JJ? That's something that a 5th grader writing fan fiction would come up with. Palpatine wants Kylo to find Super Rey. And where is Super Rey, you ask? Well, she's been continuing her training under General Leia, who we learned was also never fully trained in the Force herself. So how does that work? And continuing her training seems to mean that Leia just stands by and gives Rey encouragement. I see what you tried there, Jar Jar. Nobody's buying it. Apparently, she's also part of a dyad or some crap with Kylo, which apparently is why she is so overpowered, and there is another reason, which we will touch on shortly. And before we delve into this further, let's address Leia for a minute. As we all know, Carrie Fisher sadly passed away shortly after filming her scenes for The Last Jedi. And rather than giving her a dignified death at the end of that film, instead of the undignified death he gave Luke, Roundhead had her survive and left his successor to figure out what to do with this completely avoidable plot hole. It would have been much more dignified to give her an off-screen death at the beginning of this film, but instead, JJ cobbled together scenes with outtakes. All these scenes seem a bit off. You can tell that she's not really there, and the other actors are forced to introduce dialogue and exposition in attempting to get around the very little they had to work with. These scenes completely take you out of the film. Then we go to Finn, Poe, and poor Chewbacca, who was forced to suffer through the failed attempts at humor from the other two. Apparently there's a mole within the First Order, so I guess you can hide a massive fleet, but can't prevent a mole from leaking information. I guess JJ's been watching 24. They get the information, and we have a chase, but don't worry, it all ends quickly. Our friends learn that Palpatine has returned. What a surprise. What a surprise indeed. Hey Jar Jar, Rey finds some information about a Jedi artifact left behind by the disgraced in the last film Luke Skywalker, and our friends head off to a planet called Pisana or something. Well, poor R2-D2 gets left behind so BB-8 can have the spotlight, and so JJ can set up one of his many pointless plot threads. There they discover poor Billy D. Williams, who was roped into this train wreck, and it looks like Lando hasn't changed his outfit in 50 years. Our friends learn that the artifact is in the desert under this quicksand stuff. But, Kylo Ren uses his force powers to track them down, and apparently he's been harassing Rey with visions through their dyad thing for quite some time. That's not very 2019 of you, and they can also move things through space now. Rey finds the artifact, which is a Sith dagger with Sith text, but conveniently, C-3PO's programming doesn't allow him to read it. In other words, Jar Jar had to fill his script with something, rather than coming up with effective ways of fixing Roundhead's mess. Chewie takes the dagger, but oh no, he gets kidnapped, along with the Millennium Falcon. Then Super Rey uses the Force to stop the ship, and in an attempt to show that she isn't infallible, she accidentally blows up the ship with Force lightning. I see, JJ. So your attempt to show that she isn't an overpowered Mary Sue involved her controlling a ship mid-air and accidentally blowing it up with Force lightning. We're led to believe that Chewie was on board and got blown up too, but don't worry, he's fine. It's just another plot thread that goes nowhere. Next, Jar Jar has them head to another planet called Kijimi or something, because we must jam as many planets as possible into this film, because that's what audiences want instead of a coherent and believable storyline. This is where we get that scene in the trailer where C-3PO's eyes turn red because he has his memory erased to get the coordinates. R2-D2 has backups of his memory. Jar Jar conveniently decided to leave him behind. Don't worry though, C-3PO is fine in the end, as this is yet just another plot thread that goes nowhere. Then Jar Jar turns on the member berries, and it turns out that the coordinates lead them to Endor. They also rescue Chewie without much effort, and they get some help from Poe's old female friend, because we need new characters, but as expected, this arc goes nowhere. We get a hint of a romance, but she just shrugs him off at the end. Great work, JJ. Then, while Kylo is mentally harassing Rey, we learn that she's Palpatine's granddaughter. Yes, JJ, I'm sure that's what you intended all along, and it had nothing to do with throwing together a plot that both attempts to account for Rey being a Mary Sue and figuring out what to do with the now dead and pointless Snoke, while attempting to use shock and awe on audience members, hoping all the while that nobody asks too many questions. And shock and awe worked very briefly with The Last Jedi, but somehow, I don't think it's gonna work this time. Apparently, Palpatine ordered Rey dead when she was young because he was scared of her super duper powers. Jesus, even the Emperor was scared of Super Rey. Nope. Not an overpowered Mary Sue at all. This is also another instance where JJ once again gives the finger to Roundhead, and these instances do make me smile a bit. I guess Rey's parents weren't nobodies after all, but that's not how I read that in The Last Jedi. And when exactly did Palpatine have time for relations? This was never revealed or even discussed previously. I guess that's just another one of those things that didn't exist until now, and that we are better off not to ask questions about. Next, we get some more head-scratching JJ randomness. It looks like the mole was General Hux all along. Hux doesn't care if the rebels win, he just wants to make sure that Kylo doesn't win. This could actually have been a plot thread that might have been interesting if it was drawn out a bit. But it wasn't. It lasts about 2 minutes as he comically gets shot in the knee, and then Richard E. Grant kills him for committing treason. So yet another potentially interesting plot thread goes nowhere. Next, our friends head off to Endor, where they meet a girl named Janna, who, like Finn, is also a former stormtrooper, and it seems that there might be something developing between the two. But nope. This plot thread also goes nowhere, and old Lando just hits on her at the end. On Endor, we discover the remains of the Death Star from Return of the Jedi. JJ, quick question. That thing seemed pretty blown up at the end of that film, but now you're trying to convince us that whole parts of it, including, coincidentally, the Emperor's throne room, are fully intact. Again, better not to ask questions. Everybody tells Rey to wait until the waters have calmed a bit before heading over to the Death Star, but she ain't having none of that because she's special, and makes it there without any problems. She discovers a wayfinder, and when she touches it, she gets to see herself as a Sith. Remember that evil Rey scene that everybody was fussing over in that trailer? Yeah, it was just a vision. Then Kylo turns up, destroys the Wayfinder, and him and Rey get into a tussle. Well, isn't that exciting? Because we've never seen that before. But Leia distracts Kylo by saying Ben and begins to turn him away from the dark side as Rey stabs him through the chest. But she hears Leia too and uses her Force healing powers, first introduced earlier in the film when she healed a slug, to bring Kylo back to life. Then Leia dies in pretty much the same way as Luke. Thanks, JJ. Thanks a lot. Next, Rey steals Kylo's ship and heads off to Luke's exile planet to exile herself to avoid becoming Dark Rey, and destroys Kylo's ship to prevent herself from leaving, but seems to have forgotten that Luke's X-Wing is also there. Force Ghost Luke convinces her that this is a bad idea, so she takes his X-Wing and leaves to relive scenes that were done much better in Return of the Jedi. And so we have yet another plot thread that could have been interesting, but is over in minutes. That goes nowhere. I'm sure you'll be noticing a theme here by now. Best not ask questions, yo. Then we get a cameo from Harrison Ford because member berries. And then the disgraced Han Solo manages to fully turn Kylo away from the dark side. This was a rushed transition if ever there was one. Rey then turns up on Exegol, or whatever it's called, to confront Ragdoll Palpatine. It seems that Rey was the heir to Emperor Desperation's throne all the time. But in order to become Empress, she must first kill Emperor Desperation so he can transfer his brain essence or whatever into her. It also seems that Emperor Desperation is surrounded by a church of worshippers. There sure seems to be a lot of people in this region that was supposed to be a secret. Rey also transmitted the location to the Resistance, and they show up with a handful of ships and horses that can run on Star Destroyers, and manage to destroy a navigation relay that will only be down for a few minutes. This doesn't seem like a very good plan. They think they're all doomed, but then, out of nowhere, Lando turns up with Chewie, the Millennium Falcon, and a couple thousand ships. We are not told where these ships come from. All we learn is they are people. JJ, there's lazy writing and then there's this. I guess we're just going to pretend that there never was a New Republic now, because it seems that they forgot about this altogether. Nope. It wasn't the New Republic. It was just people. Best not ask questions. Back on the surface, we get another scene with the Knights of Ren. You know, that thing that was supposed to be big, but 3 films in and they've still done nothing with. Anyway, Kylo, now back to being called Ben, kills them off in a minute or so, and another thread goes nowhere. Then he proceeds to help Rey, who is fighting Palpatine, and things don't seem to be going very well. Emperor Desperation starts to drain their life force. You know, that thing that was introduced early in the film with the slug. Ben falls to the floor, and Emperor Desperation manages to incapacitate the entire Resistance fleet with Force Lightning. Apparently, he's now all the Sith. Well, what a pickle. But no worries, because suddenly Rey becomes all the Jedi, and we get a bunch of voice cameos as they temporarily replenish her life force. Then she kills Palpatine, possibly for good this time, with little to no effort using both lightsabers. But oh no! Rey dies, which might actually have been a good ending. But no, Kylo uses his remaining life energy to bring Rey back to life after carrying her corpse around for a bit. Then they kiss, and Ben dies, as the Resistance destroys the super planet-killing Star Destroyers. And just like the rest of the film, it seems like this ending was quickly thrown together, just to get this thing over with as soon as possible. Everyone is happy, and Rey returns to Tatooine and buries Luke and Leia's lightsabers, because she built her own, and now identifies as Rey Skywalker. And her and BB-8 walk off into the sunset. And so we have the end of the sequel trilogy, which has now displaced the prequel trilogy, which redeemed itself with Episode 3 as the worst Star Wars trilogy ever. Everything was working against this film from the word go, and if anybody could have saved this franchise, it sure as hell wasn't J.J. Abrams. There are a few good parts. Visually, it looks very nice, and John Williams' score was amazing as always, but it often seemed not to fit with what was happening on screen. Richard E. Grant always plays a great villain, so I'll give him credit for his performance as General Pride. The 3 main cast members did turn in a slightly better performance in this film, and Rey actually manages to show some emotion at some points, but they had nothing to work with. The scene where Lando and Chewie and the fleet come in, with the Star Wars theme playing in the background, was well done, as long as you don't dig too deeply. Rose Tico also got Jar Jar Binks in this one, relegated to a mere side character with only a few lines. Poor little potato sack. Also, as I said, there is some wokeness in this movie, but it is nothing compared to The Last Jedi. Obviously, this was to try to lure back fans, and as I said, while it does give us hope for the future, it was too little too late. This film fails partially because they had the wrong person writing and directing it, and partly because the damage done to the narrative and the Star Wars fanbase by The Last Jedi could probably have never been repaired. At least, not with this film. I tend to think that Disney just wanted to get this over with as soon as possible. Let this be a lesson for Hollywood going forward. You get woke, as you did in The Last Jedi, you go broke. as you did in Solo, and I don't think things are looking very good for this film. It won't be quite the level of failure that Solo was, but it's not going to perform like a main story movie should have. A new Star Wars film, prior to Solo, was always an event. You would have to buy tickets weeks in advance, but that wasn't the case with this one. I went to witness it with friends, hi Tyler, and half the theater was empty. The film was playing on half the screens at my local 16-screen multiplex, and the lobby actually seemed to be less busy than on a normal night. This should have been unheard of for the opening night of a new Star Wars movie. But like I've said over and over again, Disney and Lucasfilm, you did this to yourselves. You disrespected the fans, and this is the result. This trilogy should have been brilliant. It should have been amazing, but it seems you had other plans. Without respect, we reject. And that's it for today. Don't forget to subscribe, and check your subscription and notification status because YouTube is being shady on these things lately. And follow me on Twitter. And as always, everyone, thank you for watching, and have a great day.